Welcome to the rise and fall of The Simpsons. Less than a year after George Bush Sr. was elected president, The Simpsons aired its very first primetime episode on December 17, 1989. It's important to remember who was president because this was a starkly different era of entertainment. Given the janky animation of The Simpsons Season 1 and the pre-syndication episodes, they may be difficult to appreciate now, but back in the day, this look and feel helped drive home The Simpsons' core values, satirizing modern entertainment and turning the all-American family sitcom on its head. When it first aired, The Simpsons was a stark, clever reaction to the most popular sitcoms of the time. Creators Matt Groening, Sam Simon, and James L. Brooks envisioned an absurd, irreverent antidote to the picture-period sitcom families of Full House, Married with Children, Growing Pains, The Facts of Life, and Family Matters.
Oh, wait a minute, Shell. Some of those sitcoms weren't that sanitized. Family Matters famously didn't shy away from social issues.
It stood out because it went in the completely opposite direction of mainstream programming. Unlike those shows, The Simpsons never used nor needed canned laughter, and all of this by design. In response to the first syndicated episodes, authority figures and watchdog groups spoke out against the show, which only gave The Simpsons far more street cred.
Believe it or not, back in the 80s, Fox was at the forefront of countercultural programming.
Buzzing! It wasn't just the humor that made The Simpsons stand out either. Especially in the early seasons, that humor was always grounded in each character's development. When Bart sells his soul to Milhouse, the jokes are framed from the moral repercussions of the Faustian Act. When it's revealed that Homer is practically Mr. Burns' slave at the power plant, that episode ended with one of the most heartwarming moments in TV history. Whether it's tackling the plight of the working class, the nation's skewed family views, or human nature itself, the show has always combined humor, heart, and unapologetically rebellious attitude. And this brings us to another important factor in the rise of The Simpsons.
You are watching Fox.
We are watching Fox.
The Simpsons also had perfect timing, airing right when it could be considered just ahead of its time. While mainstream sitcoms aligned with the government's ideals for the perfect American family, The Simpsons stood its ground against authority and joked about everything because it was a cartoon. Early episodes got away with airing jokes that would be considered pretty edgy even today. In the heyday of MTV, VH1, and George Carlin, this animated series was somehow the most rock and roll and punk thing on mainstream TV.
After all, The Simpsons was a major gamble for Fox.
Yeah, a gamble that ended up paying in dividends. And not just financially. At its peak, The Simpsons was a cash cow of cultural capital.
Back in 1995, an airline decorated an entire Boeing 737 with The Simpsons. In the 90s, The Simpsons were everywhere.
Yo, hey, what's happening, dude?
According to data science expert Todd W. Schneider, the show's earliest seasons were seen by an average of around 20 million viewers per episode. Notably, the season 2 premiere, Bart Gets an F, was seen by an estimated 33.6 million viewers. The earliest seasons of Friends had an average of 24 to 31 million viewers in the mid-90s. And unlike sitcoms like Friends, Frasier, and Everybody Loves Raymond, The Simpsons expanded in an unprecedented manner.
Oh, and don't forget the merchandising.
Thanks, Rumi. Back in 1990, there were about 100 different companies licensed to sell Simpsons t-shirts, greeting cards, magnets, and other types of knickknacks. In 1991, The Simpsons Bart vs. the Space Mutants became the best-selling video game on early platforms, like the Nintendo Entertainment System, Atari ST, and the Sega Genesis. During the same year, The Simpsons beat-em-up arcade game became the third best-selling arcade machine. In 1992, Tracy Ullman's lawyers estimated that Fox reached $50 million from its initial merchandising deals. During the heyday of Simpsons mania, you couldn't turn a corner without seeing either official or even bootleg Simpsons merch.
The arcade game was as popular in Japan as it was in the US.
Exactly, Rumi. Even the blowback from the controversial pieces of merch only added to The Simpsons' notoriety and the value of those original pieces today. By 1997, Fox is estimated to have made a total of $2 billion in Simpsons-related merchandising deals. Yet Yet this was also the year that Bart Mania saw its initial decline. From the hundreds of companies that were licensed to sell Simpsons products in 1990, that number went down to just a couple dozen by 1997. And while the annual merchandising figures would dip and rise in later years, the late 90s was when the show's commercial and cultural success stabilized to unremarkable levels. Indeed, although the figures don't tell the full story, they do reflect the beginning of the end of the show. Depending on who you ask, longtime viewers will have different answers about when The Simpsons really started declining in quality. Generally, seasons 3 to 8 are considered to be the show's golden era, back when character development actually factored into the humor. And on that note, most viewers do point out one episode in particular that was so bad, The Simpsons never really even recovered.
Ah yes, the most hated episode of all time, The Principal and the Pauper, from season 9. It first aired on September 28th of 1997.
This episode had a simple premise. As it turns out, Principal Skinner was actually a man named Armin who stole the real Seymour Skinner's identity when he died in the Vietnam War. The Principal and the Pauper still had banger jokes, but it also came with a huge problem. The episode's premise threw away nearly a decade of character development for one of the show's most beloved cast members. A stickler for the rules, Skinner's backstory, childhood, and overbearing mother were all essential to his role in the show, to function as the antithesis to the anarchistic Bart Simpson. But according to this episode, it was all an act by Armin, who had been impersonating Skinner since returning from Vietnam.
And to add insult to injury, Skinner was actually still alive, but everyone ran him out of Springfield because they preferred the imposter.
In short, the Principal and the Pauper seemed to be absurd for the sake of absurdity. In contrast to the earlier seasons, this season 9 episode abandoned logic for a premise that didn't even lead anywhere and wasn't even that funny. And if you ask some viewers, this trend of skewing the show's core values actually began in season 8.
What? No way. Season 8 was great. What about when Homer became a pro boxer? Oh, and hey, Homer's new boss, Hank Scorpio, was undeniably hilarious.
Okay, I can't argue with that, but those plotlines also underscore what the critics have said about season 8. Overall, there wasn't a noticeable dip in the wittiness and joke quality during this season. That would come much later. However, season 8 was also when the characters began drifting from their established paths, ending up in situations or making decisions that simply didn't really make any sense. For instance, it was in season 8 when Marge got involved in the mafia and the Japanese Yakuza, and at some point Bart was even working for a burlesque saloon.
Wait a minute, that one's pretty in character for Bart if you ask me.
You are right, Rumi. However, it also really didn't go anywhere, making some underlying comment about society or add anything to Bart's development. In the end, the burlesque saloon got destroyed by accident. Likewise, Marge and Homer didn't really learn anything from their run-in with the Mafia, who just duked it out with the Yakuza, and while Hank Scorpio was arguably one of the most interesting forgotten characters from The Simpsons, a nice throwback by the way,
Don't mention it.
even Scorpio was just a younger, less iconic version of everyone's favorite corporate despot, Mr. Burns. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not saying season 8 was all bad, it's just that The Simpsons seemed to have abandoned its core values right around this season. Instead of satire, the show relied on sheer absurdity to deliver punchlines, and this isn't surprising if you know your mainstream TV history.
Aren't these just buzzwords that dumb people use to sound important?
Now, The Simpsons was created by Matt Groening, Sam Simon, and James L. Brooks, alongside their initial team of writers. It was this trio who conceptualized the anti-sitcom. Unapologetically absurd, but grounded not just in its own logic, but outside reality as well. This initial team included legendary comedian Conan O'Brien and Greg Daniels, who developed the American version of The Office, and by season 8, none of these writers and executive producers were directly involved in The Simpsons anymore.
Around this time, Matt Groening's main focus became Futurama, which first aired in 1999.
And meanwhile, Conan O'Brien's famously hosted Late Night beginning in 1993, so he actually left the show much earlier. As for Greg Daniels, his last writing credit for the regular Simpsons episodes was in 1996. Eventually, only a handful of the original writers remained on staff, and ultimately, this wasn't enough to keep the show's core values intact. That said, this brings us to our last big point.
I'm thirsty.
The fall of The Simpsons was inevitable.
After all, anything that becomes too popular is destined to become a shadow of its former self.
Ooh, that's kinda bleak, but that is one way to sum it up. In hindsight, The Simpsons declined because it lost its core team. Without its team's vision, the show went off the rails. But that's just show business. Showrunners and writers run into creative differences all the time, and creatives in the industry evolve with whatever opportunities they can find.
What was Conan gonna do? Not host late night?
I know, right? At the same time, the overall decline in viewership is actually not a trend unique to The Simpsons. Television itself has been getting less and less relevant in the late 20th century. Back in the 50s, the average top 30 show on the Nielsen charts boasted an average 38.2 rating, meaning that around 38.2% households tuned in. And by the time The Simpsons first aired in 1989, that number had already gone down to 17.7% and then 8.7% by 2015. Notably, it was also around this time when The Simpsons started averaging at less than 5 million viewers per season, just about 25% of its average 20 million in the earlier seasons. And in seasons 33 to 35, The Simpsons kept less than 2 million viewers in tow, or about 10% of the viewership during its peak.
So, is it time for The Simpsons to end?
Well, we'll have to leave that to you to answer that question. But what's clear is that the show is well past its heyday, and there might be nothing that anyone can really do to bring it back to its glory days.
Do you think The Simpsons should keep going?
Bells in the comments, and keep watching ScreenRant.